These will be recorded, just FYI.
Since you start recording, are you going to ask us what Minosheeri means?
No, I'm not going to ask you what Minosheeri means. Sorry, Carol. You can tell us later, though.
Let's leave it a mystery.
Okay. All right. So, Minosheeri. This is a rhetorical question. I'm not asking you or Kiro. Oh, buddy. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Bye, Benny. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do, like any good spiritual endeavor, we're going to start watching a video on YouTube. Let me just make sure everything. Can you guys see that? And give me a thumbs up if you can hear it when it starts.
That there is a way of life for a monk in the desert.
So this is a Coptic monk by the name of Father Lazarus. He's obviously not Egyptian, and we'll leave it there.
Not aware of it. I came from a culture which was entirely metropolitan, entirely urban, entirely civilized, without any reference to the kind of extreme natural environments that monks usually have. But I met someone who explained to me how St. Anthony lived in the desert, how he created monasticism in the desert, in emptiness. Now, he was the first. No one disputes this. St. Anthony's monastery, St. Anthony's desert, St. Anthony's cave, St. Anthony's well, these are all things from the beginning of Christian monasticism. So I was without a direction until I met this Egyptian girl who explained to me that St. Anthony has a place which still exists, a place where monks still live in the desert, and they live according to his rules, to the way that he lived. So for me, it was an offering from God through this Coptic girl who showed me that the beginning of monasticism, its originator, is still his place, is still his presence on earth. And so I decided to come to follow in the steps of St. Anthony, literally. All monks follow in his steps metaphorically, whether they live in America or Europe, or whether they live in China or in Africa.
Why are you stressing out?
All monks are following in the Antonian.
I wanted to listen to this. That's my job.
From St. Anthony's immense spiritual wisdom, discernment. After him, of course, came a whole host of monastic leaders. But the originator, the soul that understood how to be alone with the alone, that was St. Anthony. So I wanted to follow physically in the footsteps which he made spiritually for us. So I came here, came to this cave. I came to this altar and I knelt down and I prayed. I said to him, St. Anthony, I am desirous of your way of life because I have already an opening in St. Mary's life for me. But I need a place to complete my monastic education, my monastic formation, my monastic maturation. And I want to do it where you did it, because you are the one who taught us how to do it. I asked him, not exactly those exaggerated words, but in very simple words, I asked him, let me be your son. And as I was in this cave, as I was kneeling in front of this altar, I heard like an echo resounding in this cave. A single Coptic word, Minosheeri. This Coptic word, Minosheeri, means, in effect, the one who loves his son, or his sons. And it's a word applied to St. Anthony and to some other saints, but principally to St. Anthony, as being the father of monks, the one who loves his sons. And this I took to be what we call a word of life. In the desert literature, many beginners go to an older father and they say, Father, give me a word of life. So for me, the word of life which I took from St. Anthony in this cave, in front of this altar, was, "You are my son. I love you as my son." After I heard that word of life from St. Anthony, he repeated it 3 times because I was unsure of it. And I went to the monastery and found its interpretation, and I understood that it was a leading from St. Anthony to keep me as his son in this mountain, in this cave. And to this day, I still pray in this cave nightly. So I chose this place because it was the closest physical place I could get to the spiritual place where St. Anthony began his work, an monastic life. And I've never regretted it. This mountain, I left it twice. I left it for a brief period of service outside, of service to the General Coptic Church. And I found that that kind of service was not for me. I was not successful as a missionary, for example. I was not successful as a parish priest. But I am successful as a struggler. And I can stand here in this mountain and struggle. And that's what I can do. That's what I do. So when you find a place which God approves, you find great peace. You find a great confidence, whether you would have chosen it for yourself or not. But when you find yourself in the place that God wants for you, the power comes from within. So when I came to this mountain and I started to live here, I knew that I was doing what God wanted me to do. And every time, anytime I leave it, I become useless. I become useless to myself and to others. But when I return here, the light shines and I become aware that God is with me, that St. Anthony is with me, that St. Mary is with me, that all the spiritual powers, the angels, the saints who went before, all of them accept that I'm following in the way that I should follow. I have never regretted, or why didn't I go to another place, for example? Why didn't I go to Russia or to Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe? Why didn't I go to America where there are English-speaking monasteries? Why didn't I? No, I have never had such a question. There's a famous story about a monk called Shishoi who came to live here after the departure of St. Anthony. And he was asked, "Shishoi, how do you feel living in the cave of St. Anthony?" And he said, "I feel like a fox living in the cave of a lion." Well, if Shishoi was a fox, then I must be like a mouse, living in this cave. But it's a tradition which I understand, the life-giving tradition of the Father. So for me, St. Anthony's Monastery, St. Anthony's Mountain, principally, and this cave as the womb, as the embryo of monastic struggle. For me, it connects me to St. Anthony, it connects me to the Father. And I know that he considers me his son.
Okay. So, Minosheeri means, welcome to everybody that jumped in. We just started with the video, you didn't miss anything. So Minosheeri means the ones who love their children, the one who loves their children. In this equation, we are not the ones. This is not meant that we are gonna be the ones to serve our kids and we will love them. Like, we are the children here, and it's a call to discipleship. So this whole course, Minosheeri, is learning how are we going to disciple ourselves and be filled, so that hopefully in turn we could fill others. So this is going to be the outline that we're talking about today. So today's going to be a little different and unusual because everything else after today is going to be just content. So today is kind of a step back, and there's a lot of things to cover, so it might feel a little fragmented, so just bear with me. So we'll talk a little about St. Anthony, and then we'll talk about a couple of ideas listed here. We'll just jump right into it. So, and then the last thing we'll talk about curriculum and some kind of housekeeping items. So St. Anthony, he was living in the kind of early 300s, I guess that's 4th century. He's considered the father of monasticism, not just father of monasticism in Egypt, father of all monks. His biography was written by Saint Athanasius. He's the greatest saint ever. and this is not like hyperbole, because the difference with the special thing about Saint Anthony is that anybody can emulate him. So there are certain saints, you read this story, the whole purpose of the lives of the saints for us is that they're meant to be examples. They're not meant to be exceptions, like, this person can do it, just, suck it up and do it too. They're meant to be inspiring examples of people to emulate. It's like, if you were a baseball player, you look up, you have, Mickey Mantle in the Hall of Fame. Like it's our Hall of Fame, the people that we look up and inspire to. The great thing about St. Anthony is that he had this incredible gift of discernment, in that he was radical. Obviously, he left everything, went into the desert, but he was very practical. So when people came to him for advice, he never said, "Oh, just pray more, just fast more, just whatever." Every piece of advice was always tailored to, how much can this person handle? Just, try to give this a shot. So there's a lot of moderation, and there's a lot of discernment in St. Anthony that we can all learn from, which makes him a very, very amazing example and person to disciple yourself after. If you go to the Google Classroom, if you haven't signed up for the Google Classroom, I'll tell you how to do that in the last couple of slides. But there's 2 lectures I posted. They're actually both by priests who speak funny English. One is by a funny speaking priest from Australia. The other one is from Canada. They're both just different presentations. Both do a very good job of talking about, one kind of summarizes the book more so. That's the Aussie version. The other one talks more about his kind of his guidance. If you want to listen to both, listen to either. They're there for you. And the primary resource for the life of Saint Anthony is his biography by Saint Athanasius. So to give you a quote, to give you kind of some of the words of Saint Anthony himself before we kind of venture off and talk about other things. So this idea of discernment, I touched on it briefly. It's knowing how far to go, how far to push yourself, knowing when to seek guidance, knowing whether something is good, knowing whether something is harmful or evil. A quote by Saint Anthony. This is taken from a book called Sayings of the Desert Fathers. Some have afflicted their bodies by asceticism, but they lack discernment, and so they are far from God, which is kind of scary, that you can think that you can have somebody completely give up all of his life and could still do it wrong. So not that should scare you, but that should maybe inspire us, that if you don't, inspire us all to make sure we are discipling ourselves and we have proper guidance. I'll read one another excerpt. So without getting too much into the details of the life of St. Anthony, he had a period where he didn't see a single human being for 20 years. And then after he emerged, like if you were to think, if you hadn't seen another human being for 20 years, if you would imagine what you would be like at the end of that 20 years, you would, I don't think any of us here would be, one, sane, and then your physical body would be deteriorated, or you just wouldn't be normal. I don't think any of us would be normal. But here, this is the description of him after these 20 years. And this is taken from that book. And when they beheld him, they were amazed to see that his body had maintained its former condition, neither fat from lack of exercise, nor emaciated from fasting and combat with the demons, but was just as they had known him prior to his withdrawal. The state of his soul was one of purity, for it was not constricted by grief, nor relaxed by pleasure, nor affected by either laughter or dejection. Moreover, when he saw the crowd, he was not annoyed any more than he was elated at being embraced by so many people. He maintained utter equilibrium, like one guided by reason and steadfast in that which accords with nature. So he's not somebody that like, there are extremes of asceticism where people like starve themselves, but if things are not done with wisdom and discernment, they're not going to be edifying. And this is, at the end of not seeing somebody for 20 years, he came out and like he was normal and filled with the Spirit. So how do we maintain? We're about to start this endeavor of learning about our faith. Some of us with the hope that we'll become teachers, but not. This is for anybody's. So how do we become a disciple? So a couple of things are required. So humility is required, and Christianity stresses a lot of humility, but we don't talk about its purpose and its necessity. We don't talk about why maybe as often as we should. If you get your head out of a religious realm for a second and think of any other discipline, think of like if you at your work, the first day you're at your work, you're not going to be by yourself expected to do a job. You're going to be put underneath the guidance of somebody else. If you're starting, if you're learning how to be a master woodworker, you're going to find, or if you're learning how to be a woodworker, you're going to find a master woodworker and just stand at their side, see what they do, and see how they do it. That understanding shows humility, even in the world, because you acknowledge that you have room to grow, and at the same time, you acknowledge that there are people that have surpassed you in whatever endeavor you are in, whether it's religious or not religious. Coming back to the religious realm, there are many people, saints and living people, who have surpassed us that we can all learn from. If we have humility, that is the first required step in order to be able to learn from them. So humility is required to be a disciple, because you have to acknowledge your shortcomings and people that have surpassed you in whatever endeavor or whatever realm you're in. The other thing that's important, that kind of goes along with humility and discipling yourself, is spiritual guidance. And this is important because, so what this course is not is it's not a servant factory. It's not, here's your rubric, here's your curriculum, learn this, go and tell the little kids. If it was, then what we are doing essentially is making a factory of Pharisees, because the Pharisees knew the Old Testament inside and out, and they're really the only people that Christ was super harsh with. He was real with, and called them out all the time. So we don't want to be Pharisees. So the idea is that this, while we'll talk a little bit about the knowledge, I'm kind of alluding to what we're going to talk about later, but spiritual guidance is needed in order for all of us to grow. And it's even more required if we're going to be teachers, because you're not just responsible for yourself now, but you're responsible for others. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to start talking about knowledge and some other things. So why are we here? Why is the human race here, more specifically? Why did God create man? So if we look at the story of creation in Genesis, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So one thing I want to touch on is why the word us. It's a little weird of a selection of words. Why didn't God just say, let me make man in my image? And this is the first, kind of probably the most direct reference to the Trinity. So God is the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the Trinity is what created through the word of God, but the Trinity is what brought forth creation. And the reason that it was able to do so is because love exists within the Trinity. You can't have love without having more than one being. If God was a single entity or a single kind of one-dimensional being, there would be no love, because it takes two to tango, or in this case, it takes three to tango. So the love that exists in the Trinity was shared and given to each other person of the Trinity. And love is always outwardly directed. Love is not selfish. Love is never directed inward. True love is always outwardly directed. Therefore, true love is fruitful. We see this in we see this in the world where, you know, man and wife come together and there is child. It's the same concept where love becomes fruitful. So God created us out of his love for love. And another thing that doesn't really get talked about much is anything that has to do with our religion. I feel like it's such a cold word, so I won't use religion, but anything that has to do with our Christianity, anything that has to do with our spiritual life, our relationship with God, can be understood, I think, a lot more clearer if you look at it as a romance, as a divine romance. The next thing I wanted to play is this is an excerpt from a talk talking about just this idea of the divine romance. And this is a good segue for next week's lecture, which will talk about the Old Testament, because this is essentially the Old Testament summarized in 3.5 minutes. And give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear it when it starts.
Right? But God doesn't have that problem, right? God doesn't need to wrestle with you. God doesn't have to have a relationship with you. God doesn't need to wrestle with you. God doesn't need anything from anyone, right? That's what makes his love all the more deep, is that he wants it. He doesn't have to, but he wants it. And so for him to strive with you in this way is an immeasurable way, even though you hate it and see it as a horrible thing, is like him employing everything, saying, I just really, really love you, right? Would you please, like, abhor me, right? Acknowledge my existence on any level. I'll take anything, right? Like anything at all you got, like, I'll take it. And this is what the Old Testament is all about, actually, right? The Old Testament is all about this wrestling. And I'm saying that because in a week, right, to follow along the readings, because the passages of Holy Week are all about this context. And you'll see him enraged, yelling at his lover, right? Like begging, please come back. And he'll bargain, right? He's like, okay, if you don't all want me, will any of you take me, right? Okay, so then he takes Abraham. Okay, you don't want me, you want a king, no problem. I'll give you a king. I'll give you a king. I'll bargain. I'll give you that. Doesn't make any sense, but no problem. I'll let you have it. Okay, here's a king, but will you still love me? Will you at least acknowledge me when I give you the king? And then, will you at least pretend that you like me? Okay. And keep our anniversaries, right? Because they stopped even having the feast days, right? And he's like, can you just like pretend this date matters, right? Like this was kind of the day where you're all gonna die and I saved you, right? So can you pretend that you remember it, right? Because they had a period where they didn't even keep the Passover, right? That would be the equivalent of us today forgetting that there's something called Eucharist and just it being gone, right? They had reached those levels. Then after all the rejection, he sounds angry, right? Like very emphatically angry, which everyone gets mad at him for. Like, I can't believe he's angry. But even in the rage, he says, "Okay, I'm saying I won't talk to you at all, right?" And he'll say that. And yet I know that when you come back and you say sorry, I'm gonna retract all of this, and I'm gonna talk to you again, and I'm gonna do all of these things, and I'm gonna forgive you. And only after literally like centuries upon centuries of fighting back and forth with them, that he says, fine, I won't fight your war for you, right? It's not even saying like, I abandon you. He's saying, I'm not going to actively fight this war for you. All these other wars, I've been fighting for you. It wasn't you. And yet you think it's you. Okay, I won't fight, right? And so then finally, the Babylonians, he surrenders them to Satan, right? So the Babylonians take them, and he's like, all these gods and these other things that you are now worshiping, let them take care of you, right? Let's see if they will do for you what it is that you want. Let your wealth and all of you be damned to your own devices. I won't do this. That's descending them to Satan. Yet he still does work, right? Like even after this, right? He does rescue them from Babylon. And he does visit them in their isolation. He does rebuild the temple with them. He also says, like, let's get a better solution for all of this, which was the new covenant, right? All of this in context of this lecture, what we're talking about is God's work, right? This was God who did all of this fixing, right? This was God who did all of the active work. Unfortunately, however, not everybody sees or understands this because they are blinded by their own lusts. God is doing a work, but man doesn't really.
Okay. So the whole reason we're here, the whole reason for creation, the whole reason for understanding anything or going on an endeavor about learning about what we believe in, why we believe in it. If the purpose is just the knowledge, you're going to be a Pharisee. And it's actually very easy to become a Pharisee. So I mean, I'm not just saying that like jokingly, like we all have very, myself included, we all mess up in the same way that the Pharisees do. So when it comes to knowledge, the purpose of theology is not for the sake of the knowledge. It's to know God. Again, going back to the divine romance a metaphor. If you look at the relationship between a husband and wife, if all one spouse is interested in is information, is like, okay, my wife is a lawyer and she's this many years old and she has this degrees and she likes this and this is her favorite movie and this is whatever and this and this. Yeah, they may know everything and can answer any question about their wife, but they don't really know their wife. That's knowing about someone is very different than knowing someone. So the purpose of theology and of knowledge is not to know about God, but it is to know God. And it comes with there are many pitfalls and there are many ways to do it wrong. And we'll just talk about a couple of those. So too little knowledge or doing it the wrong way. In Hosea, which is in the Old Testament, chapter 4, verse 6, it says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being priest for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children." So again, so while the knowledge part of a relationship is not everything in the relationship, you still need to have accurate knowledge. If I am under the impression that my wife is a dentist who is I don't know, Asian, and everything part of my relationship is normal except for the fact that for whatever reason I am under the impression that my wife is an Asian dentist, that's going to affect our relationship and it'll be weird for both of us, maybe more so my wife. So you can't just say, oh, I love God, that is enough, because if you don't understand or if you don't know your God, if you don't know about your God, you won't know your God. They're not knowing about God, again, is not the end all, but it is still a requisite for knowing God. The other way you can do it wrong is by having incorrect knowledge. So if you look at the Gospel of St. John, chapter 9, verse 2, it's where the disciples of Christ find a man born blind from birth. And then they ask him in chapter 9, verse 2, now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him." So here's an example of the disciples having this incorrect, preconceived notion that, oh, this person's sick, they must have done something wrong. And we do this all the time, not just with sickness, but we do it with, oh, you're in a really bad predicament, you probably deserve it. Or insert bad thing here, it's all your fault. So this is not the correct. And here, while the disciples had this incorrect understanding of the theological origins of this person's sickness, they did something right in that at least they shared. They were in dialogue. They brought it up to Christ and were seeking correction and edification. So while they were wrong, we'll give them points for trying. At least they didn't just think that and keep it to themselves, because that's an even graver danger. Because if you have an incorrect or if you have something that you're struggling with spiritually, where you are upset at God or you're like dejected or whatever, and you don't either seek guidance or pray about it, then you're leaving no avenues for healing, for God to heal you. The last pitfall that I'll talk about when it comes to knowledge is having this is the sin I was talking about, where it's knowing for the sake of knowing, not knowing for the sake of or knowing about for the sake of knowledge, for the sake of knowledge, not for the sake of a relationship. Where and this is directed at the Pharisees. So the Pharisees were kind of a class of people during the age of Christ that literally knew the Old Testament forwards and back, and they were very legalistic about it. They were very obsessed with the details, obsessed with the letter of the law. And while the letter of the law is important, it's not as important as the spirit of the law, and capital S spirit of the law, which is God. So Matthew chapter 23 says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead man's bones and all uncleanliness." So this is a very good description of what a Pharisee is, where on the outside, it's the perception of holiness, the perception of of a relationship, but there's nothing there. And that's what we are, pointing this out so as to avoid. And we're embarking on this endeavor to start to learn about God for the purposes of knowing God. We're not embarking on this endeavor so that we can, be able to have quick answers when people try to attack us, or we're able to debate better, or we're able to, all these things are not the goal. If they're the goal, then we become Pharisees. So the way to do it right, St. Paul touches briefly on this in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1, where he says, "Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies." So knowledge is important, but again, knowledge for the sake of knowledge is useless. It doesn't help anybody. And the way to navigate these pitfalls and to do it the right way, and again, this is going to come up a lot, is through discernment and guidance. You can't do it yourself. I mean, and this is not like the religious way of saying that people need to be under submission and whatever. Like this is not just in religion. In any endeavor you go to, whether in the world or whether in our churches, you always have to look up for help, whether it be through your father of confession or through people that you trust, that are at older and wiser than you are. And the other important thing, I touched on it briefly, so I'll just kind of pass through here, is that you have to be approach this with humility, because again, we're not doing this so that we have the cheat sheet of the verses to spit out when we're debating with a Protestant about, oh, this is why we believe in the sacrament of baptism. This is why we believe in the sacrament of Eucharist, because of Luke chapter 24. I mean, that's not the point. If that's the point, then you're a Pharisee. And I'll speak very briefly on, so that I touched on the kind of pitfalls of knowledge. Here's one word of caution. for teachers, because a lot of us here are Sunday school teachers, and maybe in the future. So James chapter 3 verse 1 says, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. So that's self-explanatory. Matthew chapter 18 verse 6 says, this one can hurt. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. So these are verses to scare you straight as to what it is we're doing, because it's not like this is not teachers are not conduits for knowledge. If somebody is teaching with just that goal, they will be useless. A teacher has to be filled with the Spirit. If you are filled with the Spirit and you have the knowledge, then God will work through you. You're not working on your own. But if all you are is a talking head with a list, with a spiel and a script, then these verses should be a good wake up call that don't do it on your own.
So can you read the first one again?
Sure. James chapter 3 verse 1 says, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. And that one's also a reminder that this is not, so one, I talked a lot about what this is not. Another thing that this is not a pipeline for servants. Like, we could go through the end of this, and this, I'll touch on this kind of in the next couple of slides. Teaching is not for everybody. In the couple months ago when we had the spiritual day, we talked about our spiritual gifts and how, as a church, we all have different gifts. We all have different talents that God has given us with. And some of us, it's teaching. Others can serve in many different ways. So this is not like we're funneling everybody through one direction, because if we were, then as a church, we are setting everybody up for failure, because we're doing it the wrong way. We are all different, and we all have to work to the talents that Christ has given us. Well, I'll touch on that in a little bit. So the way to serve is like daddy, like capital D daddy. I think one good analogy of a servant is it's like being a step parent, early in the relationship, where if you are, let's change it, step parent. Let's stick with step parent. So if you're a step parent, you are entering into a family where there's already an established relationship, where there's a stronger relationship than the one you have with a child. So the way to parent in that scenario, early on, not as your relationship with the child grows, is that you follow the script of how that person has already been raised. You follow the script of their of how they were raised before you got there, until you start developing that relationship. And then ultimately early on, it's the parent, it's the biological parent who has the last word. And then in this really poor analogy, God is the parent. We are the step parents. So essentially, like, our opinion doesn't really matter. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the curriculum. So again, this is open for everybody, but with the intention of this being if this is going to be approached as a pre-servants class, attendance and completion of assignments will be tracked. We're going to do this once a week. It's going to be Monday, every day at 8. We'll try to record the classes, and roughly it'll take about 5 months to get through all of the sections. And here are the sections below. So next week we'll start the Old Testament. It'll be 3 weeks long. After that, New Testament, again, that's probably going to be 3, maybe 4 weeks long. Ecumenical councils and church history. That's the Council of Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus. We say it in all our liturgies. Oops. Sacraments and tradition. And the last thing we'll talk about which will touch on a lot of everything, is fundamental theology. So that's gonna hopefully be a good review, because we can do some comparative theology and talk about the sacraments and how that differs from other Christian denominations. We can talk about comparative theology with the ecumenical councils, and get into a couple of different things. One really cool thing that I personally am most interested is kind of a research capstone project, however you want to call it. So everybody should prepare or will be asked to prepare a 15 to 20-minute talk on a particular topic of interest. It could be any topic, any church-related topic, anything related to anything church-related that you're interested in, essentially. We'll pair you up with a mentor, and then you can do a 15, 20-minute lecture, record it, and then the idea is that we can have this kind of repository of everybody's interests and what they worked on. And it could literally be anything. A couple of them that I just like thought off the top of my head, kind of like hot topic issues that nobody really talks about, like slavery, Christianity, mental health in the gospel, women in the church, sin and sickness, the holiness of sex. Those are things that don't get a lot of airtime, but there are places in our Bible and in our tradition to answer and expound on all these topics. And it could be literally anything you're interested in. The last thing, again, if this is going to be the pre-servants route that will be required, is, and this is why if you filled in the survey, we asked for father or confession. And while that's kind of an invasive, it is a little bit of an invasive personal question. It's because if this is going to be pre-servants class, there needs to be, we need to make sure that you are well suited to serve. The last kind of housekeeping stuff, in one of the emails, there should be a link to a Google Classroom. So that's where this lecture will be posted. There'll be the links I was talking about regarding the lectures about the life of St. Anthony. That video that we started with, the entire thing is 30 minutes long, and it's linked in the Google Classroom. And then there'll be a quiz after today's class that will be posted. So that's, everything's going to happen in the Google Classroom. The other thing after today is I'll post a pretest, which will have questions that cover the curriculum from front to back. So the idea is we'll give you the pretest that'll post in maybe tomorrow or the next day. And then after the class is over, we'll give it to you again, and just so you can kind of compare your progress before and after taking all the classes. Does anybody have any questions? Because I think that's all I have. Silence.
Oh, I have a question. So when his name is Father Lazarus,
Yeah.
he mentioned something about him doing like a service outside of the monastery, and he knew it wasn't for him, and he went back to what he felt like God called him to do. And then you're talking about discernment. I don't know if you can, like, a quick overview, or how can one know what God's direction for him as far as service and where he belongs, she belongs.
That's a complicated question. So a lot of it is very generally, depending on the gifts you have, it's not like, I don't want to give the impression that there's one place for everybody to be, whether it's service or somewhere else in the church, or for some people, maybe it is. Maybe some people have an actual God-given calling that I was meant, or God wants me in this place, and I have to be doing this very particular thing. I think, yes, some of us have, there are those callings. I mean, some people have that call to monasticism. Some people have a call to, I don't know, serve in missions in, Africa or whatever. Other people, for the most part, are open to choose whatever it is that they find is edifying for them and edifying for the people that they serve. So I think, to answer your question shortly and oversimplified, for many of us, it's maybe more open-ended. Maybe for Father Lazarus, maybe for Father Lazarus in particular, it wasn't in that, like, it was a calling for him to specifically go to St. Anthony's Monastery and to live in his cave. But that's a question that needs to be worked out with you and the person that knows you the best, i.e., your spiritual guide.
Thank you.
I mean, I would also just add to that, looking at the example of Father Lazarus. I mean, what he did was he tried and failed. Like, he tried doing these things, didn't work out for him, and that's okay. It's okay to fail at things. But I will say, in addition to like your guidance and your spiritual father and all these different things and your skills, what you think you're good at, I think it's important to start and try. And if it's not what God has meant for you, then I think he'll let you know pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like the thing I feel like I struggle with is the discernment and the ability to discern. And I don't know, Sam, like when he touched on if you're a teacher and you're not really doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's not gonna be a happy ending for you. So I'm just like,
Those are the even those who have discernment for themselves. So I mean, a lot of this is what I've a lot of what I've presented was taken from the excerpt, Father Anthony Paul, that gave that kind of Old Testament overview excerpt. He talks a lot about discernment and guidance in his lectures, and he mentions, so like, he's a priest, so he gives discerning spiritual guidance to everybody, and he says at the same time, for himself, you're biased. You can't objectively analyze yourself in the same way that a surgeon can't take his appendix out. So that's something that should not, like, big, or I guess big questions like that shouldn't always be arrived at on your own. Because in the same way that it's easier, so like I was mentioning about the Pharisee, that it's, we all like make fun of them, and it's easy to see how faulty they were, or how at fault they were in the Gospels, but it's hard to see how we are like them at times, because in actuality, like, we are a lot like them. So like that I think that's a good example of how it's easier to see things when you're on the outside, so your spiritual father can see whether there are struggles that you are not aware of, and whether that would mean, serve or don't serve, or serve here instead of there.
cool thing. That was helpful.
All right. So welcome, everybody. So the next class will be next week. We're starting the Old Testament. Mark's going to be getting it. So things to do: if you're not signed up for Google Classroom, sign up, and then look at all of the, there's two required homework assignments, which is the video and a quiz. And then there's some extra reference materials for you to have fun with.
Hey, Sam, I'm looking at the the introduction under classwork. Is the quiz supposed to be in there? Or are you going to put that in later?
Now I'll put it up after class.
Okay. I didn't know if I needed to go somewhere else. So you just pick it up from classwork.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, if you go to classwork and I'll put it under the introduction heading.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Let's pray and peace out. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and God. Thank you, God, for gathering us together. Please, Lord, help us to be able to know you more and to benefit, to grow closer to you. Please, Lord, bless our fellowship, bless our time, bless those who will be speaking to us so that we can know you and that we can understand what your work in our life and to see your work in our life. Through the intercession of your mother, St. Mary, St. Monica, St. Augustine, St. Anthony, hear us when we say with thanks, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. All right, everybody.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
See you guys.
Thanks,
Have a
Sam.
good-
Welcome.
Bye.
Have a good night.
See you.
Everyone, good night.
Bye.